What's good? What's going on, YouTube? It's your boy Q1CB. I'm back with another motherfucking reaction video. Know what I'm saying? Today we're gonna be reacting to Mr. Ballin. He experienced the worst medical screw up ever. Mature audience only. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I like reacting to I'm not react. I love watching his videos. You know what I'm saying? His videos be so interesting. You know what I'm saying? So I decided I'll for to react to his videos. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, man, you have to give a thumbs up. You don't give a thumbs down. Kind of why I really don't care. Just until you want to see more reaction videos from me or any other videos from me. Make sure you guys go on my channel, check my videos. If you do like my videos on my channel, go ahead and click that subscribe button. You know what I'm saying? Get subscribe. Let's get straight into this video. Let's get it. All right. Full screen. Let's get it.
Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, and today we're going to look at 3 stories that demonstrate that. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once or twice every week. So if that's of interest to you, please offer to make the like button a nice oregano grilled cheese, but instead of using oregano, use ground up poison ivy. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications.
Am I subscribed to his channel? I watched the video. He talked about the Kenneka Jenkins case. I was like, what the fuck? I'm not even subscribed to him. Let me subscribe. Let me stop playing. Let's get back to the video.
Miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories.
But you guys grab your snacks, everything, man. This is gonna be a movie. Sideways 3, number 3.
In the late 1800s, a deadly phenomenon was occurring in America. Fire departments were beginning to use these large safety nets that resembled these huge circular stretches of canvas to try to save people that were stuck in burning buildings. During a multi-story fire, these firefighters would show up and they would get out this big net and they would all take up positions around it, holding on to the edges, and then they would move it directly underneath one of the windows of the burning building, and then they would call out to the people inside to jump out of the window onto the net. And then when they jumped, the firefighters would make sure to maneuver the net to try to catch the person right in the middle, breaking their fall and saving their lives. However, the deadly phenomenon was that these people who were stuck in these buildings were more afraid to make the jump onto the net than they were of the fire. And so despite the firefighters' constant urges to please just jump, they would stay put and they would die in the fire. And so fire departments all over America...
Because they don't trust motherfuckers like that. That shit don't... like, man, it's like you can't trust everybody, bro. It don't look safe. You know what I'm saying? It depends on how high you are. You know what I'm saying? Like, imagine you fall on all that pressure, all that force. You go through that motherfucking net. Nah, bro. Hell no. I don't trust people with that shit. It depends on how high you is. That's this video.
We're desperately trying to find ways to educate the American public about the relative safety of these nets. That certainly making this jump is a better bet than staying in an actively burning building. But despite their efforts, Americans were still staying put in these buildings and dying unnecessarily. In
like for 9/11, you think all the motherfuckers that would jump off the Twin Towers? You think they would have? You think they would have survived by landing on them damn nets? Hell no, bro. Because them buildings was high as hell. And you know what's so crazy though? This building right here, it's where the Twin Towers was at too. It's so crazy. I'm missing 9/11 because it's the new World Trade Center right here. Y'all see where my mouse at? Where my arrow at? This is where the Twin Towers was at. You know what I'm saying? Because that's the new building. That's the new World Trade Center. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, man. Yeah, man. Like on 9/11, them motherfuckers, people wouldn't survive off jumping up and landing them damn nets out them buildings. Hell no, bro. Watch this video. Probably like,
which was around the time of this deadly phenomenon, a diving instructor working out of Washington, D.C. named Robert Odlum heard about this issue, and he thought to himself,
he looked familiar.
If Americans just maybe saw someone make the jump successfully, they wouldn't be afraid anymore. And since Robert was a diving instructor and so was very comfortable jumping from heights, he thought, well, who better to make these demonstrations than me? And so, in collaboration with several Washington, D.C. fire departments, Robert began hosting these demonstrations where he would leap out of multi-story buildings onto the safety.
He died.
Very quickly, these demonstrations began attracting very big crowds, but not because they wanted the education of the event. They just wanted to see someone jump out of a building onto a net. It was like a circus act. And Robert, who was not expecting this to happen, found himself really enjoying the attention he was garnering. And so pretty quickly, he stopped doing demonstrations to show off fire net safety and instead began jumping off of huge bridges into bodies of water just because people thought it was awesome. He was becoming this celebrity in Washington, D.C. And soon, Robert began taking his show all over the country, basically touring to all these bridges all over America, and he would put out these flyers all over the city, encouraging people to show up to the bridge on the day of his jump, and then when he would get to the bridge, there'd be hundreds and hundreds of people cheering him on. But Robert's very unlikely and rapid rise to fame and fortune quickly spawned copycats. And in 1885, so 2 years after Robert had begun this jumping venture, his popularity was beginning to wane because he was no longer as unique. Before, it was really just him doing these jumps, and now he was kind of a commodity. And so, feeling desperate to become relevant again, Robert thought to himself, I gotta do...
See. He let that shit get to his motherfucking head, bro. And him wanting all that attention and shit, bro. That shit probably got him killed or something. I know he dead now because this is back in the 1800s, but yeah, let's watch the video.
That sets me apart from all the other bridge jumpers. I gotta do something that nobody else has done. That way I can once again become the bridge jumper. And it just so happened there was a bridge that had recently been constructed in New York called the Brooklyn Bridge that was massive. It spanned 1,600 feet from Brooklyn across the East River to New York City, and at its highest point, it was a whopping 130 feet off of the water. And so if Robert made that jump, he would actually set the record for the highest bridge jump ever. But by this point, bridge jumping had become popular enough that police had caught on to it, and they had made it illegal, mostly to protect the bridge jumpers from themselves.
That's how you commit suicide.
Police saw advertisements for an upcoming bridge jump, they would show up to the location on the day of the jump in force, and they would stop the jumper from jumping. And so Robert knew this, but he still needed to get the word out about this big Brooklyn Bridge jump. And so he created a very clever word-of-mouth campaign amongst people in New York, and he also began handing out these flyers that were fairly cryptic, but still told people where to go and at what time for this big spectacle they were going to see. And on May 19th of that year, the day of the jump, Robert's underground advertising campaign had worked beautifully. By early that morning, the Brooklyn Bridge was covered with hundreds and hundreds of people, also down on the banks as well. There's all these people who are all waiting to see Robert make this record-setting jump. Robert had become a bit of a showman since he began doing these bridge jumps, and he had developed a sort of trademark entrance. He would arrive in a black horse and carriage, and then once it stopped on the bridge, he would leap out, and he'd be wearing this long coat, and he would take it off, revealing his swimsuit, and the crowd would cheer, and then he would wave to the crowd, and then
I bet he was a Leo.
And leap off the bridge.
He's like a Leo.
So on May 19th,
they love all that attention.
People who were waiting for Robert, they're looking for this black horse and carriage, and around noontime, someone spotted it. It was coming onto the bridge from the Brooklyn side, and then once it stopped on the bridge, the door flung open, and Robert leapt out in his big coat. He ripped his coat off, revealing his swimsuit. The crowd was going wild. Everyone was so pumped about this. He's waving and getting ready, and he starts running to the railing to make this jump, and before he jumps, the police swarm him and arrest him. The police were not dumb. They had caught on to this underground advertising campaign, and so like everyone else, they were out in force on this bridge. There were all these officers everywhere, And so as soon as they saw this carriage, they immediately rushed over, intercepted it, and they stopped him. And so as they're arresting Robert, the crowd is starting to boo, and they're chanting, "Let him jump, let him jump." And the police, who are all kind of gathered on the Brooklyn side of the bridge, they're telling people to start to disperse. And as they're doing this, something incredible happens. On the far other side of the bridge, on the New York side of the bridge, another black horse and carriage had just come to a stop on the bridge.
Ah, so it might be probably was a stunt double or some shit. He's smart. Smart man.
Flung open, and a man had jumped out wearing a long coat. He had ripped it off, revealing a swimsuit, and the crowd went wild. It was the real Robert Odlum. The man the police had arrested was actually an actor that Robert had paid to pretend to be him. Robert had told him to show up at a particular time and
Smart.
the typical entrance
Smart.
that he would in order to suck all the police to that side of the bridge. And then while that was happening, Robert would show up and have enough time and space to make the jump. And his plan had worked perfectly.
It
And so the
did.
police, who are on the Brooklyn side, they see this happening and they realize there's no way they can run all the way across the bridge and stop Robert before he makes the jump. And so, like everyone else, they just kind of walked to the railing and they watched. And so the real Robert, after revealing his swimsuit, he waved to the crowd, he's smiling, everyone's going crazy, and he runs over to the railing, he climbs onto the other side, he's looking out over the water, and he gives one more wave to everyone down below in boats and on the banks and on the sides of the bridge, and everyone's going crazy. And then he jumps. Onlookers would later say that at first his jump was perfect. As soon as he leapt off the bridge, like he always did, he put his right arm straight over his head and he tucked his left arm by his side. This allowed him to stay in an upright vertical position as he fell. But just a second into his fall, a strong gust of wind blew Robert off his axis, and suddenly he was falling on his side. Now, it's important to understand, bridge jumpers, when they jump from really high heights, they need to land feet first in a vertical position. This allows their feet to, quote, break the surface tension of the water before the rest of their body comes crashing down. And if they do it that way, the water functions much like the firefighter's safety net. It will break the jumper's fall and save their life. But if the jumper lands at basically any other angle, the water tension will not break fast enough before the rest of their body hits the surface of the water. And so the water, instead of functioning like a net that will save them, will actually function like concrete. So after this gust of wind had blown Robert onto his side, he began flailing in midair to try to get himself back to his upright vertical position, but he couldn't do it in time, and so he slammed into the water directly on his right side. And when the crowd saw this, they figured something was wrong, but they didn't really know, and so everyone just kind of gasped and waited to see what would happen next. And they're looking, and then finally Robert emerges from the deep, except he's face down and he's motionless. And so some of Robert's friends who were on a boat below, they leapt into the water, they swam over to Robert, they pulled him back to the boat, they got him up on the deck, and when they looked at him, he looked awful. There was blood coming out of his mouth, he was barely conscious, and he would just say to them, "Did I make a good jump?" And then he would die. An autopsy would reveal that Robert's impact with the surface of the water had basically obliterated all of his insides. Amongst other things, his liver, his spleen, and both his kidneys had ruptured, and all of the ribs on his right side were broken. A year later, another bridge jumper named Larry Donovan would make the jump off of the Brooklyn Bridge and survive, setting the record for the highest bridge jump at the time.
Damn. Sheesh. Damn. That shit crazy, bro. That's what a person can. That person can fucking kill you.
In 1978, 49-year-old Georgy Markov, who was originally from Bulgaria, was living in London and working as a reporter for the British Broadcasting Company, or BBC for short. Georgy had moved to London 6 years earlier, and in the early days of him being in the UK, he would always take a cab or a bus to work. But over the last couple of years, he had taken to walking to work. Not only was it great exercise, but he also just loved the scenery. In particular, he liked on his commute to stop on the Waterloo Bridge, this very famous bridge in London, where from that position he had a beautiful view of the west.
I always want to go visit London. I want to see how it looks over there. People seem so cool over there. You know what I'm saying? They more friendly and shit. They cool people. I got some London supporters, and I fuck with some of my London supporters, man. That's the video.
Palace on one side, and he had the iconic London Eye on the other, which is a very famous Ferris wheel. So on the morning of September 7th of that year, Georgie got up and he left his flat and he began his typical commute into work. However, by the time he reached the Waterloo Bridge and was getting ready to take in the sights, it had started to rain and Georgie did not have an umbrella. So instead of sightseeing, he just kept on walking as quickly as he could to try to get to his office before he got completely soaked. But by the time he was just on the other side of the Waterloo Bridge and still had quite a distance to cover to get to work, the skies had completely opened up. And so as much as Georgie wanted to walk, because this was something he really enjoyed, he decided it was not worth it. And so he began looking for a bus stop, and he found one pretty quickly, and he rushed over to it. There was an awning that the commuters could stand underneath, and so he ran underneath this awning, getting out from under the rain, and then he proceeded to wait for the next bus to take him the rest of the way. As he stood there waiting, he suddenly felt a shooting pain in the back of his right thigh, and instinctively, without even knowing what it was, he just reached down and grabbed his leg, but he couldn't feel anything, and then he tried to kind of look around and look down at his leg, but it was just too crowded around him, so he really couldn't do it. And so he's standing there puzzled, still grabbing his leg, wondering what could have caused this pain. And the only things he could think of were, maybe someone near him had a pen or a pencil out and they accidentally
it might be a spider or something,
or maybe it's some sort of bug that bit him, a spider or a bee or something. He didn't know, but there weren't that many scenarios that made sense to him. But before he could spend very much time dwelling on
them spiders be lingering.
The bus arrived and Georgie turned around, he hopped on board, and by the time the bus pulled up in front of his office building and he had gone through the doors of the BBC, Georgie had effectively forgotten about this pain in his leg. But when he got up to his actual desk and sat down on his chair, when the underside of his thigh made contact with his chair, it sent that shooting pain into his leg, and immediately he noticed it. It was almost like he had a splinter stuck in the back of his thigh, and by pressing it down on the seat, it was driving that splinter deeper into his leg. And so Georgie stood up immediately, and he's grabbing at the back of his leg, and he's kind of craning his head to look down at the back of his leg, but he doesn't see anything there. And so he's standing there.
Why don't he just sit down and look at it? I would just sit down and just look at it like, what the f is wrong with my leg? Why he trying to look back at it? Like, if I just video.
Should do. He's got a really busy day ahead of him, and he's thinking, should I maybe go to the bathroom and see what this is? But then he tells himself, you're overthinking it. This has got to be something minor.
Nah, it's a sharp ass pain like that, bro. You better go see a motherfucking doctor, bro. If that shit is killing you, bro, if the pain is sharp and it's tense, you go see something. Don't let your mind fool you out, trick you from not seeing that shit, bro. If you feel like something is wrong with you, go see a fucking doctor or go see somebody who go see some help about it. You know what I'm saying? That shit crazy, bro. What's the video?
I need to get to work. And so he
sat
back down in his chair, being very careful with his right leg when he placed it down so as not to press too hard on the spot that hurt. And then he just got to work. And over the course of several hours, even though he knew there was a dull, aching pain in the back of his leg, he mostly forgot about it. He was just doing his job. But by the second half of the day, in the early afternoon, the pain in his leg had become so excruciating that Georgie was literally gritting his teeth and sweating profusely in order to try to ignore the pain. But at some point, it just became too much. He couldn't focus on work, and so he stood up, he left his desk, and he walked down the hall, and he went into the single-stall bathroom. And once he went inside and he shut the door behind him, he pulled his pants down and turned around and looked in the mirror to use the reflection to look at the back of his leg. And right away, there was a little bit of a relief there, because what he saw was a little bit of redness, a little bit of swelling, but nothing significant. It looked very much like someone must have hit him with a pencil by accident, or maybe it was a bee sting or a spider bite or something, but whatever it was definitely minor, at least in Georgie's mind. And so he pulls his pants back up, he tucks his shirt back in, he leaves the bathroom and goes back to his desk. And then he sits down, and despite this intense pain in his leg, he's convinced himself it's no big deal, and so he just kind of grits his way through the rest of his workday. When he finally got home again and walked through the door, Georgie's wife looked at him and was like, "What's wrong with you?" He was so pale, he was sweating profusely, he looked awful. And so he told her about what had happened with his leg, and he was still trying to kind of write it off. But she told him, "Georgie, you are sick, there's something wrong,
Yeah.
you have to go to the hospital.
Poisonous.
So at this point, Georgie was miserable. And
you gotta be a spider bite.
And so the pair, they made their way over to the emergency room at the hospital. They go inside, and a doctor pulled Georgie into an exam room and said, okay, you know, tell me what's going on. Why are you here? And Georgie would explain how in his morning commute, he had stopped at this bus stop and then felt this shooting pain. And then he told the doctor, you know, I'm pretty convinced this is someone who might have accidentally
hell no,
with a pen or a pencil or...
Ain't no fucking way that no pen could make... No, hell, if you have excruciating pain like that, like you must be going to grit your teeth and that's not a pen can't fucking do that shit, bro. Hell nah, common sense, but you know, common sense ain't coming, you know what I'm saying? But boy, you could have been, boy. What's this video?
Bite, a spider bite. I don't know what it is, but I'm convinced it's something minor. And so the doctor, he hears this, and he asks Georgie to stand up, pull his pants down, so the doctor can get a look at the site. And so Georgie does. He gets up, he drops his pants, and then as the doctor bends down and begins looking at the back of his thigh, Georgie kind of turns around and looks down, and he's shocked at what he sees. Even though he does not have a full view of the back of his leg, it's obvious that the swelling and redness on the back of his leg has grown exponentially. It looks totally horrible. And so after a couple of minutes of the doctor looking at the back of his leg, the doctor stands up and looks puzzled and tells Georgie, hold on a minute, I need somebody else to get a look at this. And so the doctor goes out into the main hall, he comes back with another doctor, and that doctor comes over, he bends down, and he looks at the back of Georgie's leg as well. And after the two of them kind of talk to each other and they're looking at the back of his leg, they stand up and they walk around and they're facing Georgie now, and they say, okay, this is going to sound totally weird, but when you were at the bus stop, before you felt the pain in your leg, was anyone around you holding a snake or a reptile? I know that sounds crazy, but the mark on the back of your leg looks exactly like a venomous bite. So Georgie's like, no, I didn't see anyone with snakes or reptiles. There was nothing out of the ordinary about what was happening around me when I felt this pain in my leg. We were all just standing there, and then I felt it in my leg. That was it. And so the doctors would tell Georgie that, you know, they didn't really know what was going on with his leg, and so the best thing to do here is just to admit him to the hospital and monitor him and, you know, try to run some tests on him and try to make him comfortable. And so that night, Georgie was admitted to the hospital. He was set up in his own hospital room, and right away, the nurses and doctors began administering different combinations of medicines and treatments to try to lower the swelling and the pain in his leg, but it just seemed like nothing was working. And so all night, his condition seemed to get worse, not better. And then the next day, when he woke up, his leg was much, much worse. It was extremely swollen. It almost looked like a balloon that had been completely filled. It was very red. And Georgie himself was also beginning to lose touch with reality. He had become convinced that someone had tried to kill him, and that was why he was so sick. And this delusion of his got so extreme that he was afraid of his doctors and nurses. And so it became a big challenge trying to help him because he was effectively fighting them off. By the next day, Georgie's condition overall had become critical. He was very clearly on the brink of death, and his mind was effectively gone. But the doctors and the nurses really had no idea what was going on with him, and so there was nothing they could do to help him.
When was this again? I'm gonna search this up at the end when I get done with this video, cause y'all know back in the day, doctors don't really know. Doctors wasn't really as they didn't know things back in the day. They don't, you know, doctors now they more advanced nowadays, cause you know technology and stuff. Versus back in the day, they didn't really know too much back in the day, man. Damn, it had to be like a snake bite or some shit, bro. And that shit took over his body and shit, making him delusional and shit. That's the poisons and shit, bro. Man.
On the last day he was in the hospital, the third day, Georgie would die. His body just shut down. And given the strangeness of Georgie's death, his body was sent for an autopsy to try to figure out what had caused that leg pain, because that seemed to be the trigger that ultimately killed him. And sure enough, during the autopsy, the coroner made a surprising discovery. Buried in the back of his right leg, right underneath the site that was where he felt the pain, was this little piece of metal. It was so small, the coroner actually almost didn't see it. But when he did see it, he put it under the microscope, and what he saw was this obviously man-made metallic disc that had these two small reservoirs.
What the fuck is that?
And so they sent this disc off for further testing, and what they discovered was there was ricin residue inside of those two reservoirs. Ricin is an extremely powerful poison. It is more lethal than cyanide, and it has no antidote. And the symptoms of ricin poisoning often look like the symptoms of other diseases or illnesses, and so it's very difficult to diagnose. And so as a result of these factors, ricin is a very popular poison for assassinations. And the belief is that that is exactly what happened to Georgie. He was assassinated.
Damn.
To this day, we don't actually know who assassinated him. However, the running theory is that Georgie, who was a reporter for the BBC, he covered politics, and he often spoke very critically about the Soviet Union.
Y'all really want to? That's the government that killed them. Because the elites, they don't want nobody to talk about things that against what they... Look, they always take out people who was against their agenda. They would take out people who goes against their agenda. So that's why they killed him, bro. Because he was speaking the truth and started going with their agenda. He went the opposite, you know what I'm saying? They always take out people who was against their agenda, bro. Yep. Like they want. It's so crazy how evil the media and shit is, bro. All that shit, politics and shit. I don't really believe in politics either, because politics, like that shit, all is a fucking game, bro. All them people work together, bro. It's a game, bro. They're trying to make it seem like they against each other, but in reality, they all working together, bro. It's all propaganda. But yeah, man, that shit crazy, bro. Poor old Georgie, bro. That shit crazy, bro. How the elites can make a lethal poisons like this, bro. It's so crazy. This shit crazy, bro. Let's watch this video.
This theory goes that the Soviet Union's intelligence agency, known as the KGB, they assassinated Georgie for what he was writing about. Adding credence to this theory, a former KGB officer named Oleg Kaligan, who was exiled to the United States in 1991, he claimed that he oversaw the assassination program that targeted Georgie Markov. He said what they did is they put this little tiny disc, that metal disc with the ricin inside of it, they put that at the tip of an umbrella, and they made sure the disc itself was fairly sharp. And then the KGB
And they did that shit so damn slick, though. How they know that he was gonna be the? They must have somebody to stalk him and spy on him, bro. And they probably set that They probably sent somebody that had the umbrella and shit, and poked Georgia with that shit. That shit crazy, bro. How slick these motherfuckers could be, bro. Man, that shit crazy, bro.
This umbrella simply
Justice for
followed Georgie on his typical morning commute, and then when he stopped at that bus stop, the assassin jabbed him in the back of the leg and then faded into the crowd. According to Oleg, those little metallic discs that had the ricin inside of them, they were actually covered with a thin layer of wax, and only when this disc had been placed inside of the target's body would their body heat melt that wax layer off, exposing the poison.
Wow.
And then their target would die several days later, as Georgie did. However, Oleg's story, despite being as compelling as it was, didn't have any hard proof to back it up. And so to this day, there has been no one officially charged with Georgie Markov's murder.
That shit crazy, bro. How slick they ass can be, bro. They don't want nobody to go against their agenda, bro. What they got going on, bro. It's where it's good versus evil. It's been a spiritual warfare going for a long time.
73-year-old Sherman Sizemore was the definition of a man's man. He had spent the bulk of his adult life doing one of the most dangerous jobs in the world, mining for coal in West Virginia. And while he was a coal miner, he apparently had lost track of the amount of times he had nearly been killed from mine shaft collapse.
I do that shit. I'm sorry. I won't be able to do that. I'm sorry.
His kids had all grown up.
I'm gonna waste my life for nobody.
And become an ordained Baptist minister. And despite his harrowing backstory and burly, intimidating appearance, he was known to be incredibly gentle and very calming to his parishioners. He was also known to be an incredibly devoted grandfather, to the point where if there was a chance to spend time with his grandkids, he would basically throw all of his responsibilities out the window to do that. But in January of that year, something changed in Sherman. He went from being this pillar in the community to being a deranged, paranoid lunatic. It all started on the afternoon of January 19th. Sherman and his wife Ruby were sitting in their home alone on the couch, just kind of doing their own things, when suddenly, out of the blue, Sherman just starts screaming as if he sees something in front of him that's terrifying him, and his scream startled Ruby so that she started screaming, and so she looks at her husband, and he's still just looking straight out ahead. He's terrified of something in front of him, and so Ruby looks from him to where he's looking, and there's nothing there. And so she turns back to her husband and she's like, "What's going on? What are you screaming for? What are you so scared of?" But Sherman wasn't able to speak. After he stopped screaming, he just continued to look straight out as if whatever had terrified him had him in this trance where he couldn't look away. And so his eyes are wide, his mouth is open, his face is going white, he's starting to sweat, and Ruby's starting to panic. She has no idea what's happening with him. And so eventually she just holds on to him and says, "Come back to me, come back to me." And Sherman at some point would. He kind of broke out of his trance. And he looked at his wife and he just says, "You can't leave me or they'll kill me." Ruby has never seen
That's crazy, bro. It's like some demons, some spirits was after. I don't know. People, I don't know, man. I don't know why people go through that shit, bro. But that shit it's scary, bro. That shit is scary, bro. Damn. Let's watch this video.
Behavior like this in her husband ever. This is a completely different person she's interacting with, and so she has no idea what to do. And so instead, she just kind of holds on to Sherman and prays that he doesn't start acting like that again. But that didn't happen. All day long, periodically, he would just start screaming about something that Ruby couldn't see. Now, Ruby did consider calling 911 and getting medics out there, but his behavior was so unusual, and he was normally such a rock who was so competent, who was so healthy, that she didn't want to. She felt like he would just kind of get through this, that if they can just get through today and get into tomorrow, that he would be better. And so she just all day was comforting him and just dealing with these episodes. And then finally they got into bed that night, and Ruby's thinking, "Thank goodness, we're going to wake up tomorrow and things will be better." But when she woke up the next morning, it was very obvious Sherman had not slept at all. He was looking straight up at the ceiling. He looked worse than the day before. It was obvious that he was not back to normal. And so Ruby called the rest of the family and had them come over to figure out what they were going to do. But when Sherman found out his family was coming to his house, he told Ruby they can't come inside. He was afraid they and others were conspiring to bury him alive. The only person he could be around was Ruby, and his whole family had no idea what to do. Little did they know there was actually a very specific reason he was acting the way he was. A few months before January 19th, which was the day Sherman turned into this different person, a few months earlier, he began complaining of severe abdominal pains. And so he and his wife Ruby and his daughter, they went to the hospital, and the doctor, after examining him and running some tests, determined that most likely his pain was coming from his gallbladder. But the only way to be sure would be to do some exploratory surgery and literally look inside of Sherman's gut and look at his gallbladder and see if that was the problem. And so the doctor asked Sherman, are you prepared to do an exploratory surgery, or would you like to just kind of wait it out and see what happens with this pain? And so Sherman talked it over with his wife and his family, and they made the decision that the pain was just too much, and so they would go forward with the surgery. And so on the morning of January 19th, so again, this is the day that Sherman basically loses his mind, he goes into the hospital completely normal. He goes in with his wife, he goes in with his daughter, and he makes his way over to the surgery wing of the hospital. He says bye to his family, and he's put on a stretcher bed, and he's wheeled in and prepped for surgery, and then brought into the operating room. And while he was in the operating room, laying on his stretcher bed, flat on his back, looking straight up at all these bright lights above him, he just struck up some chit-chat with the nurses and doctors who were in the room, prepping the room for surgery, and they were also putting the IV into his arm. Then at some point, one of the nurses lowered the oxygen mask onto Sherman's face so the anesthesiologist could administer the 2-drug cocktail that would knock him out for the surgery. Sherman was scheduled to get something known as general anesthesia for this operation, where basically he would be completely out, he wouldn't feel anything, they'd do the surgery, and then he would wake up in recovery. And so once this mask was on Sherman's face, the anesthesiologist began pumping him full of the drugs that would make him be knocked out for the surgery. However, the anesthesiologist only administered one of the 2 drugs necessary for general anesthesia. He administered the paralyzing drug, but he did not administer the actual anesthetic that would knock him out, and most importantly, would get rid of all of his pain. And so as this mask is on his face and Sherman believes he's being given the proper dosage of drugs, the nurse who was nearby told Sherman to go ahead and start counting backwards in his head from 10, knowing full well that Sherman would pass out before he reached 0. And Sherman knew this too. He had been in surgery before, and so he happily began counting in his head. 10, 9, 8, he started to feel something. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Boom, he was out. Except he wasn't. When he reached 0 in his head, counting down, he realized he had not passed out. He began taking mental stock of what was going on, and he realized he could completely feel his body, but when he tried to move his body, he couldn't. He was completely paralyzed. When he tried to make a sound, he couldn't, because his vocal cords were also paralyzed. The only thing he could move were his eyes. He could move them left and right.
That shit is scary. Oh my God! I'm not gonna. I would be panicking. I'm sorry. I would be fucking panicking. Like, seriously. Hell no, bro. No, that's some scary shit. Like, you can't, like, if nobody can't hear you or you can't do anything until you can move your eyes, I will fucking panic. I'm sorry. If I can't control shit, no, I can't do it. That's the video.
However, they had taped his eyes shut, so he can't see anything. And so Sherman is thinking to himself, okay, I've been given the drugs, maybe they're slow acting, any minute now I'm going to drift off to sleep and this will just be a distant memory. But after a few seconds, he's hearing the doctors and nurses in the room. He can't see them, but he hears them. They seem to be moving towards doing this operation, and he's still awake. And so Sherman becomes frantic and starts flicking his eyes left and right as fast as he possibly can. And the rapid eye movement actually loosened the tape on both of his eyelids, and it created a tiny slit that he could actually look through. And what he saw terrified him.
I have a challenge for all of you. Go to every computer in your house, your mom's, your dad's, your sister, your brother's computer, and
the surgeon was walking over next to him. He was getting his gloves on, and then the surgeon says, "Scalpel." And the nurse hands him this chrome metallic blade, and the surgeon takes the blade and begins cutting into Sherman's midsection. Sherman felt everything, but Sherman couldn't do anything about it. All he could do was rapidly flick his eyes left and right in hopes one of them would see that he was awake, that he was feeling this. But no one was paying attention to his face, so they didn't see his eyes moving around. And so the surgeon continued to cut into his midsection until he had cut out a fairly significantly sized hole, at which point the surgeon hands the scalpel to the nurse and says, "Clamps," at which point the nurse hands him what looks like a torture device, and the surgeon proceeds to use these clamps to pin segments of Sherman's skin that has just been cut open to his body to basically keep the hole open. And then the surgeon began tugging on the outsides of this hole in Sherman's midsection, making sure it was big enough that he could actually get a good look into his body. And every little tug is sending...
Oh, I know he was in pain. What's this video?
Lightning bolts of pain into Sherman's body. But again, all he can do is flick his eyes left and right, and no one's paying attention. Scope, the surgeon called out for, and the nurse handed him a camera that he jammed into Sherman's gut. And then the surgeon said, "Suction," and the nurse got what looked like a vacuum and pressed it inside of this open wound and began sucking out fluids from his body. The pain Sherman was experiencing is unimaginable. Every second felt like an eternity. Forceps, the surgeon called, and the nurse handed him these metal prongs that he put inside of this hole in Sherman's body, and he used them to dislodge his gallbladder so he could get a better look at it. By this point, Sherman wanted to die. He was no longer flicking his eyes left and right. He was just straight out hoping someone would finally see him. And someone did. One of the nurses standing next to the surgeon looked up at Sherman's face and saw Sherman looking back, terrified at the nurse, at which point the nurse yelled out, "Stop, he's awake, he's awake!" And the surgeon practically faints, and he looks over at the anesthesiologist and he calls him, "Get over here and fix this." And so the anesthesiologist comes running over from the side of the room. He gets up next to Sherman and begins pumping him full of painkillers. And as he's doing this, he has this moment of clarity. he remembers he didn't give him the anesthetic. And so as these new painkillers that have just been introduced begin to take their effect, Sherman's eyes go from being terrified to glazed over, and he does pass off to sleep. And so now he's out and he can't feel anything. But now the anesthesiologist and the medical team realize they have a very big problem. This patient just experienced 16 minutes of surgery and felt all of it. And at the end of it, when he wakes up, he's going to remember it, and he's probably going to file a lawsuit against the hospital. And so a decision was made. It's unclear if the anesthesiologist acted alone or if the entire team was in on this. But regardless, the anesthesiologist administered an additional drug after giving all these painkillers. This additional drug was called midazolam, but it's better known as the amnesia drug. And like its nickname implies, anyone who gets it will forget what has just happened to them. And so the idea was, by giving him this amnesia drug, he won't remember the trauma he had suffered during the surgery, and so wouldn't file a lawsuit. And so after he was given this drug, the medical team, they went back to doing the surgery, they completed it, they got him back out to recovery, and then when Sherman woke up in recovery, he did not remember what had happened to him inside of the operating room, at least not consciously. Those horrible 16 minutes had been implanted on Sherman's subconscious. Basically, his body recognized that he had experienced extreme trauma. However, the amnesia drug wiped away the memory of how he received that trauma. So there's this big disconnect in his memory. And so when Sherman came to in the recovery room, he immediately sensed something was horribly, horribly wrong. He was scared, he was anxious, he had this incredible sense of dread, but he had no memory to tie these feelings to. And so as Sherman is sitting in recovery, he must have tried to kind of hide the way he was feeling because he didn't even remotely understand it. He had been completely happy and normal going into the surgery, and now a couple of hours later, he's a complete mess. And so he leaves the hospital that day on January 19th. He goes back to his house and sits on the couch with his wife. And as he's sitting there, suddenly these horrible feelings he's having, they become too much. And he basically has a panic attack. And he starts screaming out, and he's terrified of something, but he doesn't know what it is. And then over the next couple of days, he began having these flashbacks where he would access the actual 16 minutes.
The memory started to kick in.
But when he would see someone cutting into him and opening his chest up and sucking things out
That's
of
why I say they're trying to kill me. That memory started to come back. Oh, okay. And my health, like, why he having all these memories and stuff? Like, why he screaming and shit? They thought they were trying to kill him. He thought the memory started to kick in. He thought that the surgeons was trying to kill him. That's why. But my dumb ass say he having a spiritual warfare. My dumb ass trying to be woke and shit. I'm funny as hell. Let's watch the video.
think that happened to me and that's why I feel this way. Instead, he thought it was just this horrible nightmare that he couldn't escape from. And so his family did eventually start getting doctors and psychologists and all these people involved to figure out what was wrong with him. But before they could figure it out, the whole situation had just become too terrible for Sherman. And so on February 2nd, just 2 weeks after he came out of that surgery, he would take his own life.
Damn.
His family was unbelievably heartbroken.
That shit
It didn't
crazy.
seem real that this had happened. And so they would continue to dig and figure out what went wrong. And they would finally get their hands on the medical report from the gallbladder exploratory surgery on January 19th. And after giving it to another doctor to look over, this doctor discovered that Sherman had in fact experienced 16 minutes of something known as anesthesia awareness, where you are awake or feel a portion of your surgery. And shockingly, this happens to 20,000 people a year.
Dang.
However, Sherman's case, forgetting the amnesia drug, just literally what he went through, 16 full minutes of this really intensive surgery that he felt, that is an absolute rarity. That does not happen very often. Sherman's family would go on to sue the hospital.
Yeah, I would have sued their ass too.
An undisclosed
Yo,
amount of money
give me all that settlement money.
2008. So that's going to do it, guys. If you got something out of today's
Damn,
episode
that shit
and you haven't
crazy.
done this
It was
already,
good.
please offer to make the like button a nice oregano grilled cheese. But instead of using oregano, use crushed up poison ivy. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly 1 or 2 video uploads. We now have a podcast that puts out weekly brand new stories that are only available in podcast form. It is called the Mr. Ballin Podcast, Strange, Dark, and Mysterious Stories. You can find it on Apple, Apple, Amazon, Spotify, and everywhere else you get your podcasts. If you want to connect with me, I would encourage you to follow and then message me on any major social media platform. My username on all of them is Mr. Ballin, and I really do read the bulk of my messages. We also have a second YouTube channel just called Mr. Ballin Shorts, where we post random short videos and lost episodes. We have a Facebook page where we post condensed versions.
Okay. That's all his information and shit. Okay. But yeah, man, them were some good stories. Though. Them some good ass stories, man. Like, but that last one, that shit. Woo! Oh man, damn, that shit crazy. Man, that shit crazy. But yeah, man, if you guys want me to react to any more Mr. Ballin's videos, make sure you guys comment down below on what videos that you guys want me to react to. Not we'll react to it, you know what I'm saying? But you have to give a thumbs up, you don't give a thumbs down, kind of why. I mean, okay, just too, you know what I'm saying? Yes, subscribe, see you guys in the next video. I love y'all. Peace out.